the 23rd of July 1944. Under the scorching Saipan sun, Marine Sergeant James Calloway crept through the rocky terrain of Marpi Point, his rifle at the ready, every sense alert for movement. The battle for the island had officially ended 3 weeks earlier, but scattered Japanese soldiers still fought to the death rather than surrender. Calloway had been dispatched with a small reconnaissance team to search for any remaining enemy forces hiding in the caves that pockmarked the northern cliffs. What he would discover in the next few minutes would not be another enemy combatant, but a young Japanese nurse who had somehow survived 8 days without food or water after being trapped behind enemy lines. The encounter would save her life and transform his understanding of humanity amid the horrors of the Pacific War. This is the story of how a chance discovery in an island cave became an enduring symbol of compassion that transcended the savagery of World War II. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 10,000 miles away, in a military hospital in San Diego, California, Navy Lieutenant Evelyn Winters changed the dressing on a young Marine's leg wound. Her movements precise and efficient despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones after a 12-hour shift. The hospital overflowed with casualties from the Pacific men with horrific burns, amputations, and psychological wounds that might never heal. As she worked, Winters listened to a radio broadcast announcing that American forces had secured Saipan, declaring the strategic island officially captured after weeks of brutal fighting. The announcer's voice, crisp and triumphant, described the island as secured. But Winters knew from the wounded men under her care that secured was a word that concealed more than it revealed. The capture of Saipan in July 1940 represented one of the most significant American victories in the Pacific Campaign. Located just 1,500 miles from Tokyo, the island would provide a crucial base for American B-29 bombers to strike directly at the Japanese homeland. But the human cost had been staggering. Over 3,000 American servicemen killed, more than 10,000 wounded. And the Japanese casualties had been even more catastrophic. Almost the entire garrison of 30,000 defenders killed in action, many choosing suicide over surrender. But what Lieutenant Winters couldn't know, what no one in America yet knew, was that amid this overwhelming statistics of death and destruction, a remarkable story of human connection was about to unfold on the northern cliffs of Saipan, a story that would challenge the simplistic narratives of heroism and villainy that sustained a nation at war. The northern tip of Saipan, an area known as Marpi Point, presented a landscape as beautiful as it was haunting. Dramatic limestone cliffs dropped hundreds of feet to the crashing waves below. Tropical vegetation clung to rocky outcroppings. Cave openings dotted the cliff faces like dark eyes watching the sea. In the 3 weeks since the official end of the battle, this area had become infamous among American forces as the site of mass suicides. Thousands of Japanese civilians, convinced by imperial propaganda that Americans would torture and kill them, had hurled themselves and their children from these cliffs rather than face capture. Marine patrols still discovered survivors hiding in the caves, sometimes soldiers determined to fight to the death, sometimes civilians terrified of American forces. Each patrol brought with it the tension of uncertainty, the possibility of combat or civilian casualties. For the men assigned to these patrols, the official victory celebrations meant little. Their war continued in a grim, daily struggle. Sergeant James Calloway had not expected to be in the Pacific at all. A 26-year-old, a former schoolteacher from Vermont, he had enlisted in the Marine Corps the day after Pearl Harbor, driven by a patriotic fervor that now seemed naively simple after 2 years of combat. His original unit assignment had been to the European theater, but a last-minute shuffle of personnel had redirected him to the Pacific, where he had fought through Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and now Saipan. The idealistic young man who had enlisted in December 1941 had been replaced by a hardened combat veteran who had seen too much death to maintain any romantic notions about warfare. Calloway had distinguished himself as a reliable, level-headed squad leader, the kind of non-commissioned officer who kept his men alive through a combination of caution, instinct, and decisive action when necessary. His commanding officer, Captain Michael Donovan, had selected him personally for the Marpi Point reconnaissance, knowing that if anyone could complete the mission without unnecessary casualties, it would be Calloway. The patrol had set out at dawn, 6 Marines moving cautiously through terrain they had come to respect as potentially lethal. By midday, they had cleared several small caves without incident, finding only abandoned equipment and occasionally the bodies of Japanese soldiers who had died from wounds or taken their own lives rather than surrender. The men were exhausted, dehydrated, and on edge, a dangerous combination in combat conditions. Calloway had just called for a brief rest when Private First Class Eddie Ramirez spotted the entrance to another cave, partially concealed behind a rocky outcropping. "Sarge, over there," Ramirez whispered, pointing toward the narrow opening. "Looks like it goes deep." Calloway nodded, studying the entrance. Standard procedure called for throwing grenades into suspected enemy hideouts before entering, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the size of the opening, too small to be a major bunker. Perhaps it was the location, too exposed, to be a likely defensive position. Or perhaps it was simply the accumulated instinct of a combat veteran who had learned to distinguish between different types of danger. "Cover me," he said quietly, unslinging his rifle and approaching the cave entrance slowly, deliberately. The other Marines took up positions, weapons ready, as Calloway reached the dark opening. He paused, listening intently. Combat had sharpened his senses to an almost preternatural degree, and now he strained to detect any sound from within the cave, the metallic click of a weapon being prepared, the whisper of movement, even the sound of breathing. For several seconds, he heard nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, a soft whimper emerged from the darkness. The sound was so unexpected that at first Calloway thought he had imagined it, not the defiant challenge of an enemy soldier or the silence of an empty cave, but something vulnerable, almost childlike. He signaled to Ramirez for a flashlight, and when it was passed to him, he cautiously directed its beam into the cave. The light revealed a small, natural chamber about 15 feet deep. At first glance, it appeared empty, except for some scattered debris. But as Calloway swept the beam toward the back of the cave, the light caught a flicker of movement, and then resolved into a human form huddled against the far wall. "Hello?" Calloway called softly, using one of the few Japanese phrases he had learned during the campaign. "We won't hurt you!" The figure didn't respond, but seemed to curl more tightly into itself. Calloway took a cautious step into the cave, then another, keeping his rifle ready but not aimed directly at the person. As he moved closer, the details became clearer. A young woman in what remained of a nurse's uniform, torn and filthy from days or weeks of hiding. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. She appeared to be in her early 20s, though the ordeal of survival had aged her features. Calloway stopped several feet away, not wanting to frighten her further. He slowly lowered his rifle, then crouched down to appear less threatening. "You're safe now," he said in English, knowing she probably wouldn't understand the words but hoping his tone might convey their meaning. "Safe," he repeated, making a calming gesture with his free hand. The young woman stared at him, her expression an unsettling mixture of terror and resignation. Calloway realized she was waiting for him to kill her. The thought hit him with physical force, a testament to the power of the propaganda that had convinced thousands of Japanese civilians that Americans were monsters who tortured and murdered their captives. "No," he said, shaking his head. He set his rifle on the ground and reached slowly for his canteen. Unscrewing the cap, he extended it toward her, the universal offering of water to someone in need. "Water," he said, then attempted the Japanese word, "mizu." The woman's eyes fixed on the canteen, and Calloway saw the first flicker of something other than fear cross her face, a desperate longing that revealed how close to death she truly was. He placed the canteen on the ground and pushed it gently toward her, then backed away slightly. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out with a trembling hand and grasped the canteen. Her movements were weak, uncoordinated, suggesting severe dehydration. She lifted the canteen to her lips and drank, at first cautiously, then with increasing desperation until Calloway gently motioned for her to slow down, knowing that too much water too quickly could be dangerous for someone in her condition. As she lowered the canteen, their eyes met properly for the first time. In that moment, something passed between them that transcended language, nationality, and the vast gulf of the war that had placed them on opposite sides of a global conflict. It was a moment of pure human recognition, an acknowledgement of shared vulnerability and the resilience that would stay with Calloway for the rest of his life. "James Calloway," he said, pointing to himself. Then he gestured toward her with an open hand, a question. She hesitated, perhaps weighing the risk of providing her name to an enemy. Then, in a voice barely audible after days without use, she whispered, "Aiko Nakamura." Calloway nodded, repeating the name softly. "Aiko." He pointed toward the cave entrance and made a lifting motion with his arms, asking if she could walk. She attempted to stand but collapsed almost immediately, her legs too weak to support her weight after days without food or water. Without hesitation, Calloway moved forward and gently lifted her, surprised at how little she weighed, her body reduced to skin and bone by starvation. Carrying Aiko out of the cave, Calloway emerged into the harsh sunlight to find his squad watching with expressions of shock and curiosity. Private Ramirez rushed forward, medical kit already in hand. As a former nursing student before the war, Ramirez had become the squad's unofficial medic, treating minor wounds and stabilizing more serious cases until proper medical help could arrive. "Jesus, Sarge," Ramirez muttered as he began examining Aiko, whose eyes had closed against the painful brightness of daylight. "She's in bad shape. Severe dehydration, probable malnutrition. How long you think she's been in there?" "Can't say for sure," Calloway replied, still cradling Aiko's slight form. "But from the looks of it, since the main fighting ended. Maybe longer." Captain Donovan approached, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. "What's her status, Ramirez?" "Critical but stable, sir," Ramirez responded, administering small sips of water mixed with rehydration salts from his medical kit. "She needs proper medical attention as soon as possible." Donovan nodded, then pulled Calloway aside. "We need to get back to base. Radio ahead for medical transport to meet us halfway." "Yes, sir," Calloway replied, but something in his voice made Donovan look at him more closely. "Something on your mind, Sergeant?" Calloway hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, she's terrified of what might happen to her. The Japanese propaganda, they've been told we torture prisoners." Donovan's expression softened slightly. "I'm aware of that, Sergeant. She'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Medical care, proper food, and shelter. With all due respect, sir, that's not what I'm concerned about. It's what happens after. The interrogations, the internment camps." Calloway trailed off, aware that he was overstepping his bounds but unable to shake the connection he had felt in that cave, the profound human moment that had cut through the dehumanization of war. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Donovan studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "One step at a time, Calloway. First we save her life, then we worry about what comes next." As they prepared to move out, Calloway fashioned a makeshift stretcher from canvas and branches. Aiko drifted in and out of consciousness as they began the difficult journey back toward the American lines, her condition deteriorating despite Ramirez's best efforts to stabilize her. The trek back was grueling. The tropical heat beat down mercilessly as the Marines carried the stretcher over rough terrain, rotating the burden among them to conserve strength. Calloway found himself watching Aiko's face, noting each flicker of discomfort, each labored breath. Somewhere during the journey, she had ceased to be an enemy nurse and had become simply a human being in desperate need, someone he was determined to keep alive. 2 hours into their return journey, they encountered the medical transport that had been dispatched in response to their radio call. Navy Corpsman Timothy Sullivan took charge of Aiko with brisk efficiency, starting an IV drip and checking her vital signs while Calloway hovered nearby, reluctant to leave despite having completed his official duty. "She'll make it," Sullivan told him after completing his assessment. "Though it's a miracle she survived this long. From what I can tell, she's been without proper food for at least 8 days, maybe longer. Water too, except perhaps some condensation she could gather in the cave. Most people would have died after 5 or 6 days in these conditions." Calloway nodded, watching as Aiko was loaded carefully into the transport vehicle. "Where are you taking her?" "Field hospital first," Sullivan replied, "then probably to the main medical facility we've set up in Garapan. After that, it depends on her recovery and what intelligence wants to do." The mention of intelligence sent a chill through Calloway. He knew the standard procedure for enemy personnel captured on Saipan interrogation, followed by internment for the duration of the war. Even medical personnel like Aiko would be questioned extensively about Japanese troop movements, communications, and military plans. While not technically prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention, they were still enemy nationals who might possess valuable information. As the transport prepared to depart, Calloway made a decision. "I'm coming with you," he told Sullivan, who raised an eyebrow but didn't object. "Suit yourself, Sergeant, but there's not much you can do for her now. This is a medical matter." Calloway turned to Captain Donovan. "Request permission to accompany the prisoner to the field hospital, sir. I'll rejoin the squad afterward." Donovan studied him thoughtfully. "May I ask why, Sergeant?" Calloway struggled to articulate the complex emotions driving his request. "She surrendered to me, sir. I told her she was safe. I'd like to make sure that promise is kept." After a moment's consideration, Donovan nodded. "Permission granted. Report back to base by 0800 tomorrow." The field hospital at Camp Susupe represented organized chaos at its most efficient. Tents stretched in orderly rows, filled with wounded American servicemen receiving treatment before evacuation to hospital ships offshore. A separate area had been designated for Japanese military personnel and civilians requiring medical attention, a necessity given the thousands of injured locals who had survived the battle and subsequent civilian suicides. Aiko was taken to this section, where Navy medical staff worked alongside a handful of Japanese doctors and nurses who had been captured earlier in the fighting. Calloway followed, ignoring the curious glances from medical personnel as a Marine combat sergeant trailed behind a stretcher carrying an enemy nurse. Inside the treatment tent, a Navy doctor named Commander Robert Harding took charge of Aiko's care, barking orders for intravenous fluids, nutritional supplements, and diagnostic tests. Calloway stood back, watching as medical personnel worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize her condition. The contrast between the battlefield and this place of healing was jarring. The same military organization that had brought such destruction to Saipan, now working desperately to save individual lives. "You found her?" Commander Harding asked Calloway during a brief lull in activity. "Yes, sir, in a cave at Marpi Point." Harding nodded, making notes on a clipboard. "And you said she identified herself as a nurse?" "That's right. Aiko Nakamura." The doctor paused, looking up from his notes. "You seem concerned about her, Sergeant." Calloway shifted uncomfortably, aware of how unusual his presence must appear. "I told her she was safe when I found her. I'd like to make sure that's true." Harding's expression softened with understanding. "She's receiving the same medical care we'd give to our own personnel, Sergeant. I can assure you of that." "And after?" Calloway pressed. "What happens to her then?" The doctor sighed, setting down his clipboard. "That's not entirely within my control. Once she's stabilized, intelligence will want to debrief her. Standard procedure." "She's a nurse, not a combat soldier," Calloway argued, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the patients. "What valuable intelligence could she possibly have?" "That's not for me to decide," Harding replied, though his tone suggested sympathy with Calloway's position. "But I can tell you that medical personnel often have significant knowledge about troop movements, casualties, supply situations, all valuable information to intelligence officers. As they spoke, a commotion at the entrance to the tent drew their attention. A naval officer in the distinctive uniform of military intelligence entered, accompanied by 2 armed Marines. Lieutenant Commander William Hayes, the intelligence officer assigned to the Saipan operation, had arrived much sooner than expected. "I'm looking for the Japanese nurse brought in from Marpi Point," Hayes announced, scanning the tent with cold efficiency. Harding stepped forward, placing himself between Hayes and Aiko's bed. "She's under my care, Commander, and not in any condition to be questioned at this time." Hayes frowned, clearly unused to having his authority challenged. "I understand your concern, Doctor, but this is a matter of military necessity. We have reason to believe she may have information about Japanese units still active on the island." Calloway watched the exchange with growing unease. He had encountered intelligence officers before and knew their single-minded focus on extracting information could override humanitarian concerns. While not deliberately cruel, they operated under different imperatives than medical personnel or frontline combat troops who had seen enough suffering to last a lifetime. The confrontation between medicine and military intelligence unfolded with quiet intensity, a microcosm of the larger tensions that defined wartime ethics. On one side stood Commander Harding, representing the healing profession's commitment to patient welfare regardless of nationality. On the other, Lieutenant Commander Hayes embodied the ruthless pragmatism of warfare, where information could save lives and sentiment was a luxury few could afford. And somewhere in between stood Sergeant James Calloway, a combat Marine who had killed Japanese soldiers without hesitation when necessary, but who now found himself inexplicably protective of a young woman who, just hours earlier, had been categorized as the enemy. Commander Harding stood firm against Hayes' demand, his medical authority a shield against military expediency. "This patient has severe dehydration, malnutrition, and is in a fragile physical state. Any interrogation now could compromise her recovery. I cannot permit it for at least 48 hours. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Doctor, I respect your medical opinion, but this isn't a request. Intelligence believes there may be further Japanese resistance organizing in the northern sectors. Information from this prisoner could save American lives." "She's not a prisoner," Calloway interjected, stepping forward. "She's a medical professional who was abandoned by her own forces." Hayes turned to Calloway with cold assessment. "Sergeant, this isn't your concern. Return to your unit." "With respect, sir, I've been granted permission by Captain Donovan to remain until 0800 tomorrow." Calloway maintained proper military bearing, but his voice carried an unmistakable determination. The intelligence officer studied Calloway's face, recognizing the stubborn resolve that characterized many combat veterans. Rather than escalate the confrontation, Hayes pivoted to compromise. "Very well, Doctor. You have 24 hours to stabilize her condition. I'll return tomorrow at this time, and I expect her to be prepared for questioning." He turned to leave, then paused to address Calloway. "Your concern for enemy personnel is admirable, Sergeant, but remember where your loyalties lie." After Hayes departed, Harding exhaled slowly. "That buys us some time, but he'll be back. Intelligence doesn't relent easily." "What condition is she really in?" Calloway asked. "Critical but improving," Harding replied, checking Aiko's 4. "The rehydration is helping, but 8 days without proper nutrition has taken a severe toll. Her body was starting to consume itself, breaking down muscle tissue to maintain essential functions." "Will she be strong enough for questioning tomorrow?" "Medically speaking, no, but I doubt that will stop Hayes." As they spoke, Aiko stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze, unfocused at first, sharpened when she saw Calloway. Recognition flickered across her features, followed by confusion as she registered the medical surroundings. "You're in a hospital," Calloway said gently, unsure if she understood English. "Doctor," he added, gesturing toward Harding. Aiko's lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. Calloway leaned closer. "Why?" she whispered in heavily accented English. "Why help enemy?" The simple question struck Calloway with unexpected force. In the chaos of combat and survival, he hadn't fully examined his own motivations. Why had he felt such immediate concern for this particular survivor when he'd seen so many Japanese casualties with professional detachment? "Because you're not my enemy," he answered finally. "You're a nurse. I'm a soldier. We both ended up here because of decisions made by people far away." Harding watched this exchange with interest. "You speak English," he said to Aiko. "That's helpful. Can you tell us how long you were in that cave?" Aiko hesitated, perhaps calculating whether medical information constituted military intelligence. 8? Maybe 9 days, she finally responded. "After hospital bombed." "The field hospital at Garapan?" Harding asked, making notes. She nodded weakly. "Many patients, many staff, all killed. I ran north with others." "And you've had no food or water this whole time?" Harding pressed, his medical concern evident. "Small water. From rocks in cave. No food." Her words came slowly, each one an effort. Calloway felt a renewed wave of respect for her resilience. Most people, himself included, he suspected would have succumbed to such conditions. "You must have incredible determination," he said. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Nurse training. Know-how. To survive." Her eyes began to close, the brief conversation having exhausted her limited strength. "Rest now," Harding instructed. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." As Aiko drifted back to sleep, Calloway found himself facing an unexpected moral dilemma. His military duty was clear. Enemy personnel, even medical staff, represented potential intelligence assets, but his human instinct rebelled against the thought of this young woman being subjected to interrogation in her vulnerable state. "What happens to medical personnel after questioning?" he asked Harding quietly. "Usually they're sent to internment camps for the duration of the war," the doctor replied. "Better conditions than POW camps, generally speaking, but still confinement." Calloway nodded, processing this information. "And would someone in her condition be sent immediately, or would she remain under medical care?" "That depends on the medical officer's recommendation and what intelligence decides is necessary." Harding gave Calloway a searching look. "What are you thinking, Sergeant?" "I'm not sure yet," Calloway admitted, "but something doesn't feel right about this." Harding checked his watch. "I have rounds to complete. You're welcome to stay, but try not to disturb her rest. It's the best medicine for her condition right now." After the doctor left, Calloway settled into a chair near Aiko's bed. The tent bustled with activity around them, medics changing bandages, corpsmen administering medications, doctors performing procedures. Yet in the midst of this organized chaos, he found himself drawn into quiet reflection. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a Japanese-American interpreter, Corporal David Tanaka. Born in Los Angeles to immigrant parents, Tanaka had volunteered for military service despite his family being relocated to an internment camp in Arizona after Pearl Harbor, a painful irony that he carried with quiet dignity. "Sergeant Calloway? Commander Harding mentioned you might need translation assistance," Tanaka said, extending his hand. Calloway stood to greet him. "Appreciate it, Corporal, though she seems to speak some English." "Limited medical English is common among Japanese nurses," Tanaka explained. "Many studied American and British medical texts, but for anything complex, she'll likely need interpretation." They spoke quietly, with Calloway explaining how he had found Aiko and his concerns about her impending interrogation. Tanaka listened thoughtfully, his expression revealing nothing. "You understand this puts me in a difficult position," the interpreter finally said. "My job is to facilitate intelligence gathering, not obstruct it." "I'm not asking you to obstruct anything," Calloway clarified. "I just want to ensure she's treated fairly and given time to recover before questioning." Tanaka studied him with subtle intensity. "May I ask why this particular prisoner concerns you, Sergeant? You've undoubtedly encountered other Japanese casualties during the campaign." It was the same question Calloway had been asking himself. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe because finding her alive after 8 days seemed like some kind of miracle. Or maybe because when I found her, she was waiting for me to kill her, not save her. He paused. That does something to a man, seeing that level of terror directed at you when all you're trying to do is help. The interpreter nodded slowly. The Japanese, civilians and military on this island have been told terrible things about Americans. That we torture prisoners, that we take trophies from the dead, that surrender means a fate worse than death. Is that why so many jumped from the cliffs? Yes. Mass suicide was preferable to capture in their minds. Tanaka's voice remained professional, but Calloway detected the weight of personal pain behind his words, the burden of straddling two cultures locked in mortal combat. Their conversation was interrupted when Aiko stirred again, her eyes opening with more clarity than before. She startled slightly upon seeing Tanaka, perhaps surprised to see a Japanese face in an American uniform. "Hello." Tanaka greeted her in Japanese, his tone gentle. "I'm Corporal Tanaka. I work as an interpreter for the American forces. You're safe in a field hospital." Aiko responded in rapid Japanese, her voice stronger than it had been earlier. Tanaka listened carefully, nodding occasionally, then turned to Calloway. "She's asking about what will happen to her. She wants to know if she'll be executed or sent to prison." "Tell her she'll receive medical treatment until she recovers," Calloway replied. "After that, she'll likely be questioned about Japanese forces on the island, but she won't be harmed." As Tanaka translated, Aiko's expression remained guarded. She asked another question, which Tanaka hesitated to translate. "What did she say?" Calloway pressed. "She asked why you specifically brought her here, if you expect some kind of special gratitude or favor in return." Tanaka's discomfort was evident. Calloway felt a flash of indignation followed quickly by understanding. "Tell her I expect nothing. Bringing her to medical care was my duty as a soldier, nothing more." After Tanaka translated, Aiko studied Calloway's face with newfound intensity. She spoke again, her words directed at him even though she knew he couldn't understand. "She says that in her experience, men always want something," Tanaka translated carefully, "especially in war." Calloway met her gaze directly. "Tell her that her experience with men has been unfortunate, then. I want nothing except to know that when I told her she was safe, I wasn't lying." When these words were conveyed, something shifted in Aiko's expression, not trust exactly, but perhaps the first opening toward it. She spoke again, this time more softly. "She says that before the war, she was a nurse in Tokyo," Tanaka translated. "She volunteered to serve with the military because she believed she was defending her homeland. She says she never participated in any atrocities and treated wounded Americans when they were brought to her facility." "Ask her if that's why she was left behind," Calloway suggested. "Because she treated American wounded?" Tanaka posed the question, and Aiko's response came with visible emotion. "She says no. She was separated during the bombing of the field hospital. She tried to rejoin Japanese forces but became disoriented in the chaos. By the time she reached northern Saipan, most Japanese troops had either been killed or had committed suicide. She hid in the cave, hoping to be rescued by remaining Japanese forces." Calloway nodded, picturing her desperate situation alone, without supplies, trapped between advancing Americans and a retreating Japanese force in disarray. "One more question," he said to Tanaka. "Ask her if she would have surrendered if I hadn't found her, or if she would have chosen death like the others." After this was translated, Aiko fell silent for a long moment. Her answer, when it came, was delivered with quiet dignity. "She says she doesn't know," Tanaka relayed. Each day in the cave, her resolve weakened. She had been taught that surrender was unthinkable, but hunger and thirst are powerful enemies of ideology. Before they could continue, Commander Harding returned to check Aiko's condition. "Her vital signs are improving," he announced after examining her. "But she needs uninterrupted rest now. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you both to leave." Calloway stood reluctantly. I'll return tomorrow morning, he told Aiko through Tanaka, before the intelligence officer arrives. As Calloway prepared to leave the medical tent, Tanaka followed him outside. Sergeant, may I speak frankly? Of course. Your concern for this nurse, while admirable, puts you in a precarious position. Lieutenant Commander Hayes will not look kindly on any perceived interference with his interrogation. Calloway sighed, watching the activity of the camp around them, Marines drilling, supply trucks coming and going, the everyday business of war continuing despite individual dramas. I'm not planning to interfere with anything, Corporal. I just want to make sure she's treated according to the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention is open to interpretation in wartime, Tanaka replied carefully, especially in the Pacific Theatre, where the lines between combatants and non-combatants have become blurred. She's a nurse, not a soldier, Calloway insisted. In Japan's total war doctrine, everyone serves the emperor's military purpose. Doctors, nurses, even civilians. Hayes won't see the distinction you're making. Calloway processed this perspective, recognizing the truth in Tanaka's warning. I appreciate your candor, Corporal, but I gave her my word. Just be careful how you fulfill it, Tanaka advised. This war has enough casualties already. That night, Calloway found little rest in the enlisted men's quarters. His mind kept returning to the cave at Marpi Point, to Aiko's terrified eyes when she first saw him, to her quiet resilience in the face of abandonment and starvation. He had encountered thousands of Japanese during 2 years of Pacific combat, most as enemies to be killed, some as prisoners to be processed. Why had this particular encounter affected him so deeply? Perhaps it was the growing weariness with killing that afflicted many combat veterans. Perhaps it was the stark human connection formed in that cave, transcending the artificial barriers of uniform and nationality. Or perhaps it was simply the moral clarity of the moment a starving woman needed help, and he could provide it. In the ethical quagmire of war, such clarity was rare and precious. Before dawn, Calloway made his way to the officers' quarters, where he found Captain Donovan already awake, reviewing maps by lamplight. Sergeant Calloway, Donovan acknowledged, setting aside his work. I wasn't expecting you until 0800. Sir, I'd like to request permission to escort the Japanese nurse to the main medical facility in Garapan once she's cleared for transport. Donovan studied him with interest. That's not typically a job for infantry sergeants, Calloway. We have medical transport units for that purpose. I understand, sir, but in this case, I believe my presence would help ensure a smooth transition. She trusts me, at least more than other American personnel. The captain leaned back, his expression thoughtful. This nurse seems to have made quite an impression on you. It's not that, sir, Calloway explained, though he wasn't entirely convinced of his own denial. It's about keeping my word. I told her she was safe. And you believe intelligence might threaten that safety? Not deliberately, sir. But Lieutenant Commander Hayes is focused on gathering information, not patient welfare. Donovan nodded slowly. Hayes has a job to do, just as we all do. The intelligence he gathers saves American lives. I understand that, sir. I'm not opposing the interrogation, just requesting that it be conducted with appropriate medical oversight. After a moment's consideration, Donovan reached a decision. I'll authorize you to escort her to Garapan, but only after intelligence has completed their preliminary questioning. I can't and won't interfere with Hayes's operation. Wasn't everything Calloway had hoped for, but it was something. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Sergeant, Donovan added as Calloway turned to leave. Don't let this become personal. War creates strange connections sometimes, moments of humanity in the midst of hell, but we still have a job to finish here. Understood, sir. By the time Calloway returned to the field hospital, the day's activity was in full swing. Wounded were being prepared for evacuation, new casualties were arriving from mopping up operations, and medical staff moved with the controlled urgency that characterized military medicine. He found Aiko awake, her condition visibly improved from the previous day. The IV fluids and initial nutritional support had begun to restore some vitality to her features. Commander Harding was checking her chart when Calloway arrived. "Remarkable improvement overnight," the doctor reported. "She's responding well to treatment." "Will she be strong enough for questioning?" Calloway asked, the concern evident in his voice. "Medically speaking, I'd prefer another 24 hours before any extended interrogation. But I've noted that in her chart, and whether Hayes respects it is beyond my control." Harding completed his notes and moved on to the next patient, leaving Calloway alone with Aiko. Without Tanaka present, communication was limited to simple phrases and gestures. Calloway pointed to the IV and gave a questioning thumbs up. Aiko nodded, then surprised him by speaking in careful English. "Better. Today. Thank you for finding me." "You're welcome," he replied, genuinely pleased at her improvement. "More doctor coming today. Ask questions." Understanding darkened her expression. "Intelligence officer," she said, demonstrating better English comprehension than speaking ability. "I know." "Yes," Calloway confirmed, "but doctor here too. No harm." Aiko seemed to consider this, then asked, "After questions." "What happened?" It was the question Calloway had been dreading, partly because he didn't have a satisfactory answer. "Hospital in Garapan," he explained. Then, "I don't know." The uncertainty hung between them, a reminder of the vast machinery of war that controlled their individual fates. Before they could continue, Lieutenant Commander Hayes arrived, earlier than expected, accompanied by Corporal Tanaka and a medical corpsman. "Sergeant," Hayes acknowledged Calloway coolly, "you may leave now. This is an intelligence matter." "Sir," Commander Harding recommended another 24 hours of recovery before extended questioning. Calloway objected, maintaining military courtesy but standing his ground. "I've reviewed her chart, and the corpsman will monitor her condition during the interview," Hayes replied. "This is not open for discussion." Calloway hesitated, torn between military discipline and personal concern. He glanced at Tanaka, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod, a silent assurance that he would ensure fair treatment during the interrogation. "Sir, Captain Donovan has authorized me to escort the prisoner to Garapan after your questioning is complete," Calloway said, presenting his compromise position. Hayes frowned, clearly displeased with this arrangement but unwilling to challenge a direct order from a line officer. "Very well. Wait outside. This may take several hours." As Calloway reluctantly turned to leave, Aiko caught his eye. In that brief glance, he saw not fear but a quiet resilience, the same strength that had kept her alive for 8 days in that Marpi Point cave. It reassured him, even as he worried about the questioning she was about to face. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. Calloway waited outside the medical tent, occasionally catching fragments of conversation, Tanaka's measured translations, Hayes' insistent questioning, Aiko's soft responses. The corpsman emerged twice to get water, each time assuring Calloway that the patient remained stable. When Hayes finally emerged, his expression revealed little. "Sergeant, your prisoner will be transported to Garapan tomorrow morning at 0800. She's provided useful information about remaining Japanese positions in the northern sectors. I've recommended she be held for further questioning once she's fully recovered." "Yes, sir. I'll arrange transport." Hayes studied him with clinical detachment. "Your interest in this prisoner is noted, Sergeant. I trust it remains professional." "Of course, sir. Captain Donovan can confirm my assignment." After Hayes departed, Calloway re-entered the tent to find Aiko lying with her eyes closed, Tanaka sitting beside her bed. The interpreter stood as Calloway approached. "How did it go?" Calloway asked quietly. "As well as could be expected," Tanaka replied. "She cooperated fully, though her military knowledge is limited, mostly information about casualties, medical supply situations, and general troop movements she observed while working at field hospitals." "Did Hayes press her hard?" "He was persistent but not abusive." The corpsman intervened twice when she showed signs of exhaustion. Calloway nodded, relieved. "And her condition?" stable, but the questioning took a toll. Commander Harding has ordered rest until morning. As they spoke, Aiko opened her eyes. She looked drained but composed, her dignity intact despite the ordeal of interrogation. She said something to Tanaka in Japanese. "She's asking if you're still planning to accompany her to Garapan." The interpreter translated. "Yes," Calloway confirmed. "I'll be escorting her personally." When Tanaka conveyed this, Aiko's expression softened slightly. She spoke again, longer this time. "She says she answered all questions truthfully," Tanaka translated. "She wants you to know she never participated in any mistreatment of American wounded. She says some Japanese doctors refused to treat captured Americans, but she and several other nurses provided care when they could, sometimes secretly." This revelation didn't surprise Calloway. Something in Aiko's demeanor from the beginning had suggested compassion rather than the fanaticism that characterized many Japanese military personnel encountered on Saipan. "Tell her I believe her," he said simply, "and that she should rest now. Tomorrow will be another difficult day." After Tanaka translated, Aiko closed her eyes again, exhaustion claiming her. The interpreter prepared to leave, then paused beside Calloway. "She told Hayes about a cache of medical supplies hidden in caves near Marpi Point," he said quietly. "Supplies that could benefit our wounded as well. That's primarily why he's recommended further questioning rather than immediate internment." This information added a new dimension to Calloway's understanding of the situation. "So she's valuable to both sides." "Precisely. Which may work in her favor or place her in greater jeopardy, depending on how things develop." After Tanaka left, Calloway remained by Aiko's bedside, watching her sleep. The simple rise and fall of her breathing seemed miraculous given the circumstances of her survival. 8 days without food, alone in a cave, surrounded by an enemy she had been taught would show no mercy, yet here she was, alive and helping save American lives through her knowledge of hidden medical supplies. In that moment, observing her vulnerable yet resilient form, Sergeant James Calloway made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. Whatever happened next, he would ensure that his promise of safety was kept not just in letter, but in spirit. Not because of any personal attachment or misplaced sympathy for the enemy, but because in a war that had stripped away so much humanity, this one act of compassion felt like reclaiming something essential to his own survival. Dawn broke over Saipan with the hazy golden light peculiar to tropical islands. At the field hospital, preparations were underway for the day's medical evacuations, including the transfer of Aiko Nakamura to the main facility in Garapan. Commander Harding completed his morning rounds, checking Aiko's vital signs one final time before clearing her for transport. "She's stable enough for the journey," Harding informed Calloway, who had arrived early to oversee the preparations. "Still weak, but the most critical phase has passed. I've written comprehensive transfer orders detailing her nutritional requirements and medication schedule." Calloway nodded, reviewing the medical documents. "What's your professional assessment of her recovery timeline?" "With proper care, she should regain basic strength within 2 weeks. Full recovery will take longer, perhaps a month or more." Harding hesitated, then added, "I've noted in her file that she provided critical information about hidden medical supplies. That should ensure she receives proper treatment rather than standard POW protocols." "I appreciate that, Doctor." As they spoke, 2 corpsmen arrived with a stretcher. Aiko was awake, her dark eyes following the activity around her with quiet awareness. She wore clean hospital garments now, her hair washed and combed back from her face. The transformation was remarkable while still gaunt from her ordeal. Her natural dignity had re-emerged. Calloway approached her bedside. "Good morning. We're moving you to Garapan today." She nodded, indicating understanding. "Better hospital," she replied in her limited English. "Better facilities. I'll be going with you." Something like relief flickered across her features. After the previous day's interrogation, Calloway suspected she feared being handed over to intelligence personnel permanently. His presence, while hardly a guarantee of protection, offered some continuity in the chaos of her captivity. The corpsman transferred her carefully to the stretcher. Despite her improvement, she remained too weak to walk the distance to the transport vehicle. Calloway gathered her, few possessions, the remnants of her nurse's uniform, now cleaned and folded, and a small pocket notebook that intelligence had examined and returned, finding nothing but personal notes and medical observations. Outside, a medical transport jeep waited. Rather than the standard military ambulance, this was a modified vehicle with a covered rear compartment, configured to navigate Saipan's bomb-cratered roads with less jarring for patients. The driver, a young corporal from Tennessee named Ellis, greeted them with the casual familiarity of military logistics personnel. "Morning, Sarge. This our passenger to Garapan?" His eyes lingered curiously on Aiko, Japanese prisoners being relatively uncommon in medical transports. "That's right. Direct orders from Captain Donovan and Commander Harding. We need a smooth ride, she's still in delicate condition. Roads are rough in sections, but I'll do my best," Ellis promised. "Been doing this run for 3 weeks now, know every pothole between here and Garapan." The corpsman loaded Aiko's stretcher into the rear compartment, securing it to prevent shifting during transit. Calloway climbed in beside her, while Ellis took the wheel. As they pulled away from the field hospital, Calloway caught a glimpse of Lieutenant Commander Hayes watching their departure from the command tent, his expression unreadable, but his attention unmistakable. The journey to Garapan would take approximately 2 hours, depending on road conditions. The first part of the route followed what had been the main highway of Saipan before the invasion, now a scarred ribbon of broken asphalt and filled craters. As they travelled, Calloway observed the devastated landscape passing by. Burned-out Japanese tanks, abandoned artillery positions, villages reduced to rubble, the physical manifestation of 2 armies colliding with industrial fury. Beside him, Aiko watched the same scenes through half-closed eyes. Calloway wondered what she must be feeling, seeing the destruction of the island she had been sent to defend. Was it shame at defeat, grief for fallen comrades, or simply the numb acceptance that comes after prolonged trauma? "First time I transported a Japanese nurse," Ellis commented from the driver's seat, breaking the silence. "Plenty of wounded Marines, couple civilians, even a captured officer last week, but never medical staff. She was trapped in a cave at Marpi Point for 8 days, Calloway explained. No food, barely any water." Ellis whistled softly. 8 days? That's something. Tough lady. "She provided information about hidden medical supplies that could help our wounded," Calloway added, wanting Ellis to understand Aiko wasn't just another enemy prisoner. The driver nodded appreciatively. "Well, that makes her all right in my book. My buddy Jackson took shrapnel last week, still in critical care. Good medicine makes all the difference." About halfway to Garapan, Ellis stopped to check the engine, which had been making concerning sounds. While he worked under the hood, Calloway offered Aiko water from his canteen. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger than the previous day. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She considered the question carefully before answering. "Body weak, mind clearer." "Good. The hospital in Garapan has better food, better medicine." Aiko looked directly at him then, with an intensity that suggested she was gathering courage for an important question. "After hospital. What happens to me?" It was the question Calloway had been avoiding, partly because he didn't have a definitive answer, partly because he knew the likely options weren't what she hoped to hear. "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "Probably an internment camp eventually." "Prison," she translated flatly. "Not exactly. Internment camps are for civilians and medical personnel, better conditions than military POW camps." This distinction seemed to offer little comfort. Aiko turned her face away, looking out at the ruined landscape. "Home is very far now." The simple statement carried the weight of profound displacement, not just physical distance from Japan, but the unbridgeable gap created by war and captivity. Home, in every meaningful sense, had become inaccessible. Ellis returned, announcing he had fixed the minor issue with the fan belt, and they resumed their journey. The terrain gradually changed as they approached Garapan, the island's former capital city. Once a thriving commercial center under Japanese administration, it now lay in ruins. Systematic American bombing followed by intense ground combat had left few buildings intact. The military hospital had been established in what remained of the Japanese civilian hospital, a substantial concrete structure that had survived relatively intact. American engineers had reinforced damaged sections and expanded capacity with adjoining tent wards, creating a hybrid facility that served both military personnel and civilian casualties. Upon arrival, they were met by Lieutenant Sarah Chambers, the Navy nurse who served as patient intake coordinator. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of a Japanese nurse being transported with a Marine sergeant as escort. "Sergeant Calloway? I received the transfer orders this morning." She examined the medical documentation from Commander Harding. Dehydration, severe malnutrition, 8 days without proper sustenance. Quite remarkable she survived. "She's tougher than she looks," Calloway replied. Lieutenant Chambers directed orderlies to transfer Aiko to a special ward designated for non-combatant enemy personnel, primarily civilian casualties and medical staff. "I'll have her settled in Ward C, Doctor. Franklin will examine her after morning rounds. Will you be remaining as security detail?" "I'm assigned as escort through the transfer process," Calloway explained, deliberately vague about the duration of his responsibilities. "Very well. You can wait, in the staff area. I'll notify you when she's been processed and examined." As the orderlies wheeled Aiko toward the intake area, she turned back to look at Calloway, a flash of anxiety crossing her features. The structured military efficiency that reassured American personnel often had the opposite effect on enemy captives, who couldn't understand the procedures and feared what might happen next. "It's all right," Calloway called after her. "I'll check on you soon." The staff area turned out to be a small room with basic amenities, coffee, chairs, and a bulletin board covered with official notices and duty rosters. Calloway helped himself to coffee and settled in to wait, trying to organize his thoughts about what would happen next. His official responsibility would end once Aiko was properly transferred to the hospital's custody. Captain Donovan had authorized him to escort her to Garapan, not to remain as her personal guardian. Yet the thought of simply walking away felt like a betrayal of the implicit promise he had made in that cave at Marpi Point. After about an hour, a hospital corpsman approached. "Sergeant Calloway? Lieutenant Chambers says your prisoner has been processed and assigned to Ward C, Bed 14. Dr. Franklin has completed his examination and authorized visitors." Calloway followed the corpsman through the hospital complex. Ward C was housed in a wing of the original concrete building, repurposed for enemy non-combatants. Unlike the main wards filled with wounded Marines, this area was quieter, with fewer patients and more individual space. Security was present but not intrusive, a single Marine guard at the entrance rather than armed personnel throughout the ward. Aiko lay in a proper hospital bed now, with fresh linens and a proper IV setup. The improvement over the field hospital was substantial. She appeared to be sleeping, but opened her eyes as Calloway approached. "Better?" he asked, gesturing to the surroundings. She nodded. "Much better. Real bed." Calloway smiled. "Probably feels good after 8 days in a cave. And many days before, on ground, moving with army," she added, offering a glimpse of the hardships she had endured even before being separated from Japanese forces. Before they could continue their conversation, a middle-aged Navy doctor approached, introducing himself as Commander William Franklin, Chief Medical Officer for the non-combatant ward. "Sergeant Calloway, Lieutenant Chambers mentioned you've been overseeing this patient's transfer." Franklin reviewed Aiko's chart. "Her condition upon admission suggests she should have died days ago, yet her vital signs are stabilizing nicely." "Will she make a full recovery?" Calloway asked. "Barring complications, yes, though it will take time. The body doesn't bounce back quickly from that level of deprivation." Franklin studied Calloway with professional curiosity. "May I ask your interest in this particular patient?" It's somewhat unusual for a combat sergeant to personally escort a prisoner transfer. I found her in a cave at Marpi Point, Calloway explained. She's provided intelligence about hidden medical supplies that could help our wounded. Franklin nodded thoughtfully. I see. Well, she's in good hands now. We'll ensure proper nutrition and monitoring until she's stabilized, then determine next steps in consultation with command. And after she's recovered? Calloway pressed. That's beyond my purview, Sergeant. Medical decisions I can make. Disposition of enemy personnel is a matter for G2 Intelligence and Theatre Command. The doctor's tone was sympathetic but firm. He wouldn't speculate on matters outside his authority. After Franklin departed, Calloway pulled a chair beside Aiko's bed. Her eyes had taken on the glazed quality of someone fighting medication-induced drowsiness. They gave me medicine, she explained, her words slightly slurred. For sleep and pain. Good. You need the rest to recover. She struggled to maintain focus, clearly wanting to say something important before succumbing to the medication. Why you stay? Duty finished. The direct question caught Calloway off guard. Why was he staying? His official responsibility had indeed ended. Protocol dictated that he report back to his unit now that the transfer was complete. Yet here he sat, reluctant to leave. I told you were safe, he said finally. I want to make sure that remains true. She studied him through heavy-lidded eyes. One person cannot promise safety in war. Maybe not, but I can try. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before her eyes closed completely, the medication finally overcoming her determination to remain awake. Calloway sat beside her for several minutes, watching her breathing settle into the rhythm of deep sleep. He was preparing to leave when Lieutenant Chambers entered with news that altered everything. Sergeant Calloway, I've just received communication from 5th Division Headquarters. Intelligence is sending officers to collect Nurse Nakamura tomorrow morning for extended debriefing at their forward operating base. Extended debriefing? Calloway questioned, immediately alert. She's barely begun recovery. The orders cite critical intelligence needs regarding medical supply caches and Japanese units still active in northern Saipan. Chambers' professional demeanor couldn't entirely mask her own concerns. I've noted in her file that she requires at least 72 hours of stabilization before transport, but whether that will delay their plans is outside my authority. Who signed the orders? Lieutenant Commander Hayes. The name confirmed Calloway's suspicions. Hayes was moving to secure Aiko as an intelligence asset, regardless of her medical condition. While not technically violating regulations, intelligence needs often superseded medical recommendations in combat zones. It ran counter to the spirit of proper treatment for non-combatant prisoners. Thank you for letting me know, Calloway said, his mind already working through possible responses. Of course, I thought you should be informed, given your escort responsibilities. Lieutenant Chambers hesitated, then added more quietly, Commander Franklin has also expressed concerns about premature transport, but military necessity often prevails in these situations. After Chambers left, Calloway remained by Aiko's bedside, watching her sleep while weighing his options. Each potential course of action carried significant risks, both to Aiko's welfare and to his own military standing. Interfering with intelligence operations, even for humanitarian reasons, could result in severe consequences. Yet allowing Hayes to remove her from proper medical care before she had stabilized felt like a fundamental betrayal of the promise he had made in that cave. "You're safe now," he had said, words that had formed a bond between them that transcended their official designations as captor and prisoner. As evening approached, Calloway made his decision. He would return to his unit as ordered, but first he would seek out the one person who might have both the authority and the inclination to intervene on Aiko's behalf. Major David Takahashi served as the senior Japanese-American liaison officer for civilian affairs on Saipan. A Nisei from California whose family had been interned after Pearl Harbor, Takahashi had nevertheless volunteered for military service, proving his loyalty through exemplary performance that had earned him field promotion to major, despite the prejudice that often limited advancement for Japanese Americans. Calloway found Takahashi in his office at Civil Affairs Headquarters, reviewing reports on civilian resettlement efforts. The major looked up from his paperwork, surprise evident on his features. "Sergeant Calloway, what brings you to Civil Affairs?" "Sir, I need your advice regarding a Japanese nurse captured at Marpi Point." Takahashi's expression grew cautious. "Aiko Nakamura? I've received preliminary reports about her capture and the medical supplies intelligence she provided." "Yes, sir. She's currently recovering at Garapan Hospital, but intelligence is planning to transfer her tomorrow for extended debriefing, despite medical recommendations for at least 72 hours of stabilization." The major leaned back in his chair, studying Calloway thoughtfully. "And your interest in this matter, Sergeant? I gave her my word she would be safe, sir. Moving her prematurely puts her recovery at risk." "Your word." Takahashi repeated the phrase with measured emphasis. "An interesting concept in wartime." "Sir? I'm merely observing that personal promises and military necessity often find themselves in opposition." Takahashi gestured for Calloway to sit. "Tell me more about this nurse and your concerns." For the next 20 minutes, Calloway provided a detailed account of finding Aiko, her medical condition, her cooperation with intelligence, and his concerns about premature transfer. Takahashi listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You understand that Lieutenant Commander Hayes is acting within his authority," Takahashi noted when Calloway finished. "Intelligence collection is a priority, particularly regarding remaining Japanese forces." "Yes, sir, but she's already provided what information she has. Further questioning could wait until her condition stabilizes." Takahashi nodded slowly. "There's another dimension you may not have considered, Sergeant. Japanese nurses received different indoctrination than combat troops. Many were educated women from respected families, with more exposure to Western ideas before the war. They represent potential bridges between our cultures once hostilities end." This perspective hadn't occurred to Calloway, who had been focused solely on Aiko's immediate welfare. "You're suggesting she has value beyond immediate intelligence?" "I'm suggesting that how we treat enemy medical personnel now may influence post-war reconciliation later." Takahashi checked his watch, then made a decision. "I'll speak with Colonel Williams about this matter. As civilian affairs liaison, I can make a case for treating Nurse Nakamura as a valuable cultural asset requiring proper medical care before further questioning." "Thank you, sir." Takahashi fixed Calloway with a penetrating gaze. "I'm curious, Sergeant. Have you considered what happens after she recovers? Japan will not welcome back those who surrendered, even medical personnel. Her family may reject her. Her professional standing will be compromised." The question struck at the heart of Calloway's unexamined assumptions. He had been focused entirely on Aiko's immediate safety, not the longer-term implications of her capture and survival. "No, sir. I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Perhaps you should." Takahashi's tone was gentle but insistent. "Saving her life was honorable. Ensuring proper medical treatment is commendable. But the consequences of survival may be more complex than you've anticipated." These words followed Calloway as he returned to his unit that evening, reporting to Captain Donovan that the prisoner transfer had been completed successfully. He made no mention of his visit to Major Takahashi, though he suspected Donovan would learn of it through official channels eventually. The following morning, Calloway received unexpected orders. He was being temporarily assigned to Major Takahashi's Civil Affairs Unit as liaison for Japanese medical personnel recovery efforts. The orders cited his unique field experience with enemy medical staff capture and processing, a transparent pretext that nevertheless carried official approval from Colonel Williams, commander of the military government section. Reporting to Takahashi's office, Calloway found the major in conversation with Commander Franklin from the hospital. Both men looked up as he entered. "Sergeant Calloway, good timing," Takahashi greeted him. "Commander Franklin was just updating me on Nurse Nakamura's condition." She's responding well to treatment, Franklin reported. Vital signs stabilizing, though still far from full recovery. And the intelligence transfer orders? Calloway asked. Temporarily suspended, Takahashi replied with subtle satisfaction. Colonel Williams has authorized a medical priority designation for Nurse Nakamura based on her potential value in locating additional medical supplies and possibly assisting with civilian Japanese medical needs. The implication was clear. Takahashi had found a way to protect Aiko that served military interests while respecting humanitarian concerns. By recategorizing her as a medical asset rather than merely an intelligence source, he had established a legitimate rationale for prioritizing her recovery. Your temporary assignment to civil affairs will include monitoring her progress and facilitating communication once she's strong enough for limited cooperation, Takahashi explained. This provides official coverage for your continued involvement while serving genuine military needs. Calloway recognized the elegant solution Takahashi had crafted a way to fulfill both military obligations and personal promises, without requiring either to be compromised. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Sergeant. Lieutenant Commander Hayes isn't pleased with this arrangement. He's agreed to it only because Colonel Williams outranks him and because we've framed it as expanding, not limiting, intelligence gathering. Over the following weeks, Aiko's recovery progressed steadily under proper medical care. Calloway visited daily in his official capacity, their communication improving as her strength returned. With Takahashi occasionally serving as interpreter, they began to learn more about each other's lives before the war. Aiko had been a nurse at a prestigious Tokyo hospital, the daughter of a physician who had encouraged her professional aspirations despite traditional expectations for women. She had volunteered for military service after her younger brother was killed at Guadalcanal, believing it her duty to support the war effort. Yet her letters home had expressed growing disillusionment with military leadership as she witnessed the suffering of wounded soldiers receiving inadequate care due to supply shortages and strategic priorities that devalued individual lives. Calloway shared stories of Vermont, his teaching career, his reasons for enlisting after Pearl Harbor, and his gradual transformation from idealistic volunteer to battle-hardened veteran. He spoke of comrades lost, civilians caught in the crossfire, and his struggle to reconcile patriotic duty with the moral complexities of warfare. These conversations, carefully conducted within the boundaries of military propriety, and always with Takahashi's knowledge, created a foundation of mutual understanding that transcended their official designations as captor and prisoner. They discovered shared values despite opposing loyalties, commitment to healing, respect for human dignity, belief in individual conscience, even within military structures. As August arrived, bringing news of American advances across the Pacific and increasingly desperate Japanese resistance, Calloway found himself contemplating Takahashi's question about Aiko's future after recovery. The war would end eventually, perhaps sooner than expected given recent Allied successes. What then? Return to a Japan that scorned survivors? Internment in America until diplomatic relations normalized? The options seemed equally bleak. During one of their conversations, with Takahashi present as both interpreter and official observer, Calloway finally asked the question that had been troubling him. Have you thought about what happens after the war? Aiko's expression grew somber as Takahashi translated. Her response came slowly, each word carefully chosen. In Japan, they say, captured soldiers are dead to family and country, Takahashi translated. For women, especially those who served in military capacity, the shame would be even greater. My family would be expected to disown me. Would they? Calloway pressed. Aiko hesitated before answering. My father, perhaps not. He studied in America before the war, but social pressure would be tremendous. My mother, my extended family, they would not understand choosing life over death when capture seemed inevitable. The reality of her situation crystallized in that moment. Survival had secured her immediate future, but complicated her long-term prospects in ways neither of them had fully considered when he found her in that cave. There may be alternatives, Takahashi interjected, speaking both as interpreter and advisor. After the war, America will need Japanese speakers to help with occupation and reconstruction. Medical professionals especially will be valuable. There could be opportunities for those willing to assist in rebuilding. This possibility hung in the air between them, not quite hope, but perhaps a path forward that neither had envisioned. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship, shifting focus from past survival to future possibilities, however uncertain. As summer turned to fall, and news arrived of atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, followed by Japan's unconditional surrender, the personal connection between Sergeant James Calloway and Nurse Aiko Nakamura became something neither had anticipated on that July day at Marpi Point, a bridge between enemy nations, a testament to human connection forged amid humanity's darkest hour, and eventually, as occupation forces sought to rebuild a shattered Japan, the foundation for reconciliation efforts that would help heal wounds on both sides. When Calloway finally received orders to return to the United States in December 1945, he made a detour to visit Aiko one last time. She had been transferred to Hawaii, where she worked at a military hospital treating Japanese prisoners requiring specialized care. Their farewell took place under the watchful eyes of military authorities, but carried the weight of a journey neither could have imagined when he first said those simple words in a cave on Saipan. "You're safe now." In the years that followed, as Japan rebuilt under American occupation and former enemies became reluctant allies in a new global order, the story of the Marine who found a starving Japanese nurse and chose compassion over indifference would be told and retold not as an official military narrative, but as a personal testament to the possibility of human connection even across the battle lines of humanity's most devastating conflict. And through it all, those 4 words remained a promise kept against all odds. You're safe now. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.